Okay, welcome back everyone to the Outstanding User Interfaces with Shiny book. Today we are going to discuss chapter 13 of this book club, which is about Shiny inputs lifecycles. There are two main topics covered in this chapter. The first one is app initialization, and the second one is update input. Initialization is about the client side, and the update input is about mainly about the server side. But in both cases, we do see the client side and server side connecting. So everything discussed in this chapter is mainly about JavaScript functions and handlers and callbacks, which were covered in the previous two chapters. Hopefully, this will be a relatively quick meeting today because each of these sections are not very long, and we are only going to look at the overview of what is happening. And this will be a good reference for future chapters. So in the app initialization, we are going to look at the client side. And the main goal of this whole flow in the app initialization section is to find all the input widgets in the page that could be like the sliders and drop downs, uh, bind them to Shiny, which means binding inputs with outputs, and sending those values to the server via the WebSocket connection. The WebSocket connection is what Shiny uses for the real-time data transfer between client and server. So we'll start with this figure, which is showing us the overall workflow, and I put this in this separate tab. So let's take a look at the input bindings first. The first thing is the init Shiny function that is initialized, that basically initializes when the Shiny app is launched. And as a result, the function of input bindings is, and just to recall, input bindings are the JavaScript objects that define how to get or set values, how to subscribe to user interaction events, and assign a unique ID. So these are all stored in a registry called input bindings, which is actually an instance of the class binding registry, which is shown here in the chapter right here. So this class is actually has an instance which we have as input bindings. And this is where inputs are registered using shiny.inputbindings.register. Then you provide it with the binding and the input type, here referred to as the reference.
If I remember well, that's where you place your package, name, and maybe the method.
Yeah, that's also what I recall. Thank you. Um, okay, let's switch to the image. So now after the init shiny is run, it gets triggered when the app loads in the browser. It then initializes, which means that this part is triggered internally, and it prepares for the input setup. Now the underscore bind all scope uh, and leading to bind inputs means that it starts finding all the input elements in the document object model. And it does it through the get bindings function here. The get bindings is going to register, it's going to get all the registered bindings. And for each binding, it will try to find the elements in the document object model that matches that binding's CSS selector. If it cannot find it, it will skip. So here it says stop, but my guess is that it will just skip that. If it does find it, then it will apply these properties. And what these properties do, the get ID is going to return the input ID. For example, in R, we use input $sign and the name of the input. So it essentially get ID is going to do that from the JavaScript side, as I understand. The get type is going to map to register input handler. So if we see that here mentioned in the chapter, the register input handler right here, it optionally handles any register input handler defined by the user on the R side.
Yes, to
Uh,
get the format, maybe a date. That was the
yeah,
example.
yeah, as discussed in the previous chapters. And then the get value here is going to fetch the current input value, and the subscribe is going to set up the event listener. So those could be listening to clicks or changes in the inputs. In step 5, we have adds the binding data to document object model. And that happens by uh, changing the data attribute. If we go here, so the Shiny input binding is provided as the data attribute, as well as it adds a class Shiny bound input, which is right here. So this class is also added to the within the document object model. And then it also adds the bound inputs JavaScript object.
So basically, you don't place in your DOM, for example, get test, for example, a simple test box. You won't have the binding for that test box, even though Shiny have that already implemented. So
Mhm.
they don't feel the UI with all the bindings they have created, just the one that are present.
Right, right.
I think that's the fire step here.
Yeah, yeah, that's also my understanding. And at the steps number 6, it apply the rate policies. So rate policies that I understand is these are like the debouncing or the throttle uh, policies, which means that if a function is triggered, then it will only be triggered within a specified time interval. So even if that function is being triggered several times, it's not actually triggered, it's not actually used unless that specified time interval is complete. So there's a rate, a limit to how many times something can be, which in this context would mean how many times the input, the change in the input is provided in this flow. In step 7, we have the shiny bound event, which is triggered, and it signals that the input is ready and it is now bound. If a user calls shiny unbind all that Angel previously showed, uh, that was in the previous chapter discussion, that unbind all will basically remove the inputs and triggers the shiny unbound. So the connection between input and outputs is gone. Um, in step 8, we have the all the input values, so all the client data is obtained, and that could also include some metadata, and that is called as the initial values. In step 9, the Shiny app dot connect is called with these initial values, which means that this is going to start the WebSocket connection to the server from the client side. Now, step 10 here has the details of what is happening when Shiny app dot connect is called. So it will call the create socket function, which first creates the WebSocket connection. It triggers the Shiny connected event. It removes disconnected overlay, and then it sends the initial values to the server. I'm not 100% sure what removing disconnected overlay means, but maybe it is like if there was a previous connection to an input value, And if it was not completely provided in the flow, then it's maybe disconnected. But I'm not sure what this means exactly. Essentially, in this step, at the end of this step, we have all the initial values that are sent to the server. And then at the end, the Shiny session initialized is indicating here that the client setup is complete. And so the values from the client side are now connected to the server, sent to the server via the WebSocket connection. Angel, do you want to add anything about the remove disconnected overlay?
I don't really understand what's overlay. Do you think that we look up in Google, we can find something quickly?
Yeah, we
Because it's like
can.
I don't understand what they mean by overlay.
Yeah, disconnected. I think it's not even discussed in the chapter. It's only the
No,
figure.
yeah.
Disconnected overlay. Shiny disconnect overlay. Hmm.
Or just look for overlay and that's it. Because I don't maybe we understand what is overlay, meaning,
Hmm.
we can understand better. Okay, they use in this, it's not only for web apps because OBS is for recording the screen.
Yeah,
Because I don't really. I think we don't understand because we don't. I don't know what's overlay.
yeah. I think it's maybe just that WebSocket connection. And it's maybe talking about that connection that
Yeah,
at some point disconnected, so it will remove any values from before, maybe.
yeah. Maybe it's something that is not part of the binding,
Hmm. Yeah, maybe the input value was not yet bound, but then there was a disconnection, maybe.
or maybe it's part
Um,
of the not stop. Like okay, get binding. It wasn't found in the DOM. Okay,
mm,
you stop and maybe you remove that in that part. That could be
yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
that could be a possible. But can be other thing, because overlay like two, they are not talking about bindings.
Mhm.
It's no expression for bindings. We don't know what's that.
Right.
And it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that these details are maybe much more in depth for someone who wants to create new inputs. For them, these are really important. For most users who are just going to use existing inputs, I don't think this is that much important. But anyways, maybe this will be helpful later. Um, you're muted if you're saying
Yeah,
something.
yeah, yeah. I was thinking about what would be the process to start an app as a Shiny app, and then imagine that the app becomes popular, and thousands of people start coming to the website. I was talking about that topic with some chatbot, and he's explained me,
Mhm.
okay, maybe the better transition would be to move to change the bindings from the app to move it to Node.js. And maybe understanding this process can help me to change manually the UI in order to start moving the application from the, to connect to a new WebSocket basically. To start
Mhm.
moving to Node.js rather than connecting to R. Or maybe even this part is maybe the part that they need to know to enable Shiny for Python.
Yeah, yeah, I think it makes sense. Let's see if this is useful later in the chapters. All right, so we've discussed the flow, and then later in this section, it is discussed that previously the shiny JavaScript object was discussed, and we had an example where we saw how we can get different objects from the shiny object, so different components of it. So one of that is the shiny app object, which is defined here. It's actually the function shiny app, which contains the socket connection, the input values, the initial input value, bindings, values, errors. and there are more here. And as an example, here's this app that is run, and then we can see the shiny app and initial input dot ups, which means that what is the initial input value. So let's take a look at that. I'm going to run the app, and so I think my RStudio window is not shown, right?
Sorry, it's not showing.
Okay, I'm going to launch it in the browser.
Yeah, perfect. We can see it now.
Okay. So the initial value, as you can see, is 500. If we now inspect it, and then I'm going to copy this, and in the console,
Console.
we are going to put that.
I think the experience is that you cannot paste in that console
Um,
for some reason.
oh, I need to say allow pasting.
Oh, I don't know. I didn't know that trick. Oh, perfect.
Oh, it says right here. I generally actually use
Oh,
Firefox. I don't use Chrome, so I didn't know that I have to do this.
oh, perfect.
Right. So with this, we get 500 here. Yeah, in Firefox, when I was preparing for the chapter, I didn't have
Mm-hmm.
any issues. Um, the next thing, as an example here, is the input values. If we change them, so the initial value was 500, and every time we run what we have here, it will show the initial values. But let's change this. Let's look at the initial value. Again, it's still 500. But if we now look at the value, input values, then it shows us the current value.
Okay, so it cached the original one.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
And the the next one is the initial input and input. Oh, it's just talking about that. Yeah, so these were just the two. Yeah, so initial input will always show us the initial input regardless of what this value was, and that's because we have that here. It's the attribute of this
The
object,
shiny object, yeah.
and the input values will show us the current values. All right, so this was the first topic for this chapter. The second one is update input, which is about the reverse. So we have when we are updating the input, and it mainly uses this figure as the flow. So the dashed lines that we see here, these dashed lines are uh, indicating that above this is the server and below it is the client, which means the browser. So the first thing that happens here is the server sends a message. And let me take an example. I'm just going to put that in the browser because that's the only thing that you see right now. So let's say we have this update text input and we have the ID test here. And this is essentially in this example what we are updating. We have an existing text input and we are updating it from the R server. So when we do that, the server sends an input message using the session object. It send input message, and it will take in the server sends the message to the client over the WebSocket connection, and that is why we have the WebSocket.on message here, which in the chapter was just socket.on message. And it uses this dispatch message function, which is the I think this whole thing, the on message thing, is called as the JavaScript handler. uh, and it uses the dispatch message to route the message to the correct handler, which in this case is input message handler, which is described. Uh, yeah, sorry, I'm switching between my notes and and the chapter. So yeah, so this sends using a dispatch message sends the message to the appropriate handler, which is the input messages handler. And here is the input messages uh, that is described in detail. I did not go into this line by line, but just to understand that this is mainly to send the message to the appropriate handler. Um, let's switch back to the figure. So in this first step, we updated the text input. It was sent from the server to the client using the on message WebSocket and on message attribute or function of the WebSocket, and it uses dispatch message to do that. And then it also sends messages to the handlers that, as we discussed a moment ago, using the add message handler as shown right here. So once this part is done, we are now in step 3, which includes input messages handler. This is essentially the details of the input messages handler and other handlers. Other handlers are not discussed in the chapter, but I here, for example, models and notifications are shown as an example. So there could be other handlers that are also sending information, but we will focus on the input messages handlers because we are updating the input and we want to see what happens next. So using the input messages handler, it first finds the element in the DOM, the document object model. And as I showed you in this example, the ID is test. So it will then find the test ID, the input that has this ID, and it will then find this element. Once it is found, it will uh, uh, it accesses its input binding, and then it triggers the Shiny update input. In the next step, it then receives the message, which is now going to handle this update. So Shiny update input is triggered. This update input is also an attribute of the Shiny object. So that is triggered, and then it is going to run the receive message, which will handle this update. In this next step, it calls the set value to apply the new value, whatever new value we provided in the update text input in our example. And then it
Yes.
also,
That's when the user can see the change
yeah, yeah,
in the set
uh,
value.
yeah. At the current step, at this point, the user cannot see the change yet because the data is not yet sent. And then it runs the subscribe function to reattach any listeners. So in this example, update text input is just the text input. So we don't have a click listener, it's just the value that is going to be changed. Then in the next step, it applies the callbacks. And the callbacks that it uses is the value
The
change.
callbacks were for updating the Chinese server.
Uh, sorry?
The callbacks were to update the Chinese server part. Like
Yeah, yeah,
by setting the value in JavaScript, you will see the value in the DOM, but you won't have the reaction in the server part, after that change. So the callback is, to take the information back to R.
exactly. Yeah. So, here is the value change callback defined. Again, I'm not going to go into all of this detail. I still don't understand a lot of it, but I understand the purpose of it. The purpose is that it will get the input ID and the type. It will also get the current value of the input. And then it's going to call inputs.setInput with ID, the value, and any options. So this is happening at this point. In the next step, it's now going to queue all of this data. So it's not going to send the data right away. It's going to queue it. So it will, so it stores the new value on the client side and then queues it for sending to the server later. And it will store it inside this object called as pending data.
That can be important when you have many users, maybe,
Yeah.
maybe the service, making something extra and you need to add the independent so you don't lose the signal.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, generally, in most cases, Shiny apps don't have a lot of users. But yeah, for an app where there is a lot of users simultaneously, this becomes really important. Very good point. Um, so, and that is why the data is sent in batches instead of sending it every time a new value is updated right away. So then in the next step, Shiny app dot send input is used. Shiny app dot send input right here. So Shiny app dot send input is used to then send the data, and it batches all updates into a single message. And as I understand it, it would be a JavaScript, sorry, a JSON object, which will contain the method, for example, update, and the data argument contains all the values. And so it is sent over using the WebSocket, using the this dot send message, which is right here. Let's see if we're missing anything here. Yeah, so once the Shiny app.send input is used with the message, it's sent to the server from the client side, update the current input values on the client side, and here we have the same WebSocket which will receive this message, and then also gets the update status as we were discussing before through that through that JSON object. Yeah, so I think this is everything in the chapter for today. Let me see if I missed anything here. No. So yeah, overall, we now know what is the flow from the client side and from the server side based on the previous two chapters and this chapter. And in the next chapter, there will be more details, and that would be the last chapter 4. We have the application, which is Bootstrap 4. Right, so I'm
Yeah, and
going
then we have
to,
events. Oh, wow. There are many JavaScript chapters here.
yeah.
Events and these are your app with custom address. Okay, perfect. Great presentation, Maed. Thanks for sharing. That was a really good way to explain this, showing the map first and then the functions.
No problem, thanks.